Welcome, everybody, to Podcast Answers, the show where I help you start and grow your podcast, answering any podcasting questions along the way. That's right. Today, we are talking about accessibility. What's that mean for your podcast? What's that mean? How do you create a accessible podcast for yourself? But first, a few things to cover. If you want to join us in our live Zoom backstage, you can go to podcastanswers.com/backstage. That'll get you into our backstage, and that will allow you to hang out with me, ask questions, potentially even be on screen. So if you want to do that, again, that's podcastanswers.com/backstage, and we would love to have you. But first, let's talk a little bit today about podcast accessibility. So what are some ways to make your podcast more accessible? First is providing transcripts for every episode. So you can easily do that a couple different ways. I use a software called Mac Whisper, which allows me to generate after I've created my podcast episode. I take Mac Whisper, I run my audio through it, and what it does is it creates a transcript file, a SRT or a VTT transcript file, which you can then, on most new podcast apps, or most new podcast hosts, you can attach that to that, and it will allow you to create a transcript that's in your RSS feed that allows the podcast apps to play that file as you're playing it, as you're playing your episode, so that way people can read along with your episode. It's super handy for those, especially that may be hard of hearing, or as we've seen today, a lot of our new generation, it has the captions on when they were talking, like when we're watching TV, they have captions on. So you can do this for that, so that they can make it easier to hear, easier to see, easier to be with that. Now, the other thing that you can do is some podcast hosts will generate that SRT or VTT file for you, meaning that you upload your file and they will generate the file, put it in your feed. Now, this may be a cost for some things. I host on Captivate, and if I allow Captivate to create my transcript, then it does cost me a little bit for them to do that. But they will generate that if you do not have that ability to generate that on your own. Yes. So it is a pretty awesome software because it does allow you. Mac Whisper is a pretty awesome software because it does allow you to create that right locally on your machine, and it allows you to get all of the files that you need for your podcast host. Now, the great thing is, if you don't even do this, some podcast players will generate one for you. Apple Podcasts recently has started creating transcripts for you if you do not provide one in your podcast feed. So the great thing about that is that allows you don't even have to do anything. You can just go upload your file, and then once Apple Podcasts gets that, they will create a transcript for you for those watching in Apple or listening in Apple Podcasts. So that's one way that you can make your podcast more accessible. The other thing is to use clear audio and speak at a moderate pace. So using a good mic is going to help. You don't have to get a mic like I have. I have an SM7B. That's about a $400 mic, but that mic is going to create amazing audio and allow you to have amazing audio going forward. Now, you don't have to have an amazing mic to do that. You can get one for $100 or even less, but that will make your audio sound really good. Again, audio that's not listenable, people are going to turn off right away. It's not going to be able to hear because sometimes people have hearing problems, and if you have a good mic, that's going to help them get that audio in their ear, and be able to understand you better. The next thing that I'm going to say is speak slow. So speak at a moderate pace. You're going to have to speak slower than you think you need to. It's going to sound painful probably to yourself. I know for me, when I'm not behind the mic right here, I speak at an incredibly fast pace. And some may even say that even on the mic that I do that, that I speak really fast and it's hard to understand me. I always joked growing up that my sister and I spoke so fast to each other and we could understand each other, but no one else could understand us because we spoke so fast. But in a podcast, you don't want to do that. You want to speak slower than you think that you need to. It's going to sound really slow to you because you hear yourself. When you're hearing yourself, you understand what you're saying because you know the intent behind your topics, you know the intent behind what your speech. And so, but the other people that are listening to you don't know what you're saying. You know that. You know what you're saying, so you can say it faster. But those listening to you don't know what you're going to be saying. And so it takes some time to hear you. And when you speak fast, a lot of times we jumble up our words, we smush them together, and it's really hard to understand. Now, that gets even worse for somebody who's not a native speaker of the language that you're speaking in. I'm doing this podcast in English, but if I had a French speaker that doesn't know English very well, or a Spanish speaker that doesn't know English very well, now think about that. They're trying to translate that in their head. They're trying to listen to you speak. And it gets really hard to do that because if you're speaking so fast that they can't understand what you're saying, they're going to have trouble trying to translate what you're saying in their head. So speak a lot slower than you think that you actually need to get your job done. Now, the next thing that I would say is when you are talking and you're describing something, because now, especially if we're doing video, if we're doing a video show, like I have this on YouTube as well as an audio podcast, I may say something like, "Hey, this is my phone. This is an awesome phone." Well, I just held up my phone, but you don't know that if you're just listening in audio. So I need to describe what I'm saying. This is my phone. It's an iPhone 16. On the back of it, it has a clear case, and on the back of it is a QR code. And it is an amazing phone. I love it. Describe what you're saying. Describe what you're seeing. Describe, because your audio only listeners are not going to have any idea what you're actually talking about. The next thing I want to say too, and this isn't necessarily for making it accessible exactly, but depending on what your show is about, you may need to include content warnings for sensitive topics. Do this in a pre-roll. I've recently done an episode, not on this show, but on a different one, where normally that show is going to be family friendly. Normally we're talking to families. I know people listen in the car with their kids. And our guest used some language that wasn't necessarily suitable for all audiences. And so what I did is after the interview, I went ahead and recorded a pre-roll that said essentially, "Hey, I know that people may normally listen to this in the car with their youngins, and just wanted to let you know this interview does contain some language. Or if I was talking about a sensitive topic that I may not want my kids to hear, I want to include that in a pre-roll." Now, another thing that you can do is offer multiple audio formats. This is going to become accessible for people. You have to think about this. Your audio, if you're recording in an MP3 and you're, let's say, doing it at stereo 128K, that's not very, very big in today's standards, right? I mean, it's about a meg a minute or something. But what happens to those people who are in third world countries or in places that don't actually, they can't get the data that you can? There's a lot of places that can't get data like we can here in the US and in other parts of the world. So think about creating a lower quality format, maybe something that's mono in 96K or even less bitrate. It's going to be a lot smaller file. You can do this a couple different ways. You can use the alternative enclosure with a new podcasting 2.0 standards, which allows you to say, "Hey, this is my normal enclosure, but this is a lower bitrate one, or this is a video one." That's not necessarily used in a lot of the podcasting apps yet, But the other thing you can do is create separate feeds for this. So let's say you have a video feed and an audio feed for people who just want to listen to your audio, or even a low bitrate feed. Create a separate podcast RSS feed. Now, the other thing you want to do is ensure that your website and podcast platform are screen reader friendly. There's a couple ways you can do this, but you want to make sure that screen reader friendly with all of your alt tags on your pictures and things like that. That way, people that are using screen readers can understand what they're seeing on your website and things like that. Because again, I do recommend that you have a website. Now, again, the last thing I would say is consider adding captions if you have a video version. Now, traditional actual video podcasts in the RSS, you should probably bake in your captions for that. And what that I mean is when you're doing your video editing, generate captions and they're on the video. This way people watching your video can have captions. Now, again, that's not super relevant in today's day and time because a lot of people who are doing video shows are not using video files in their RSS. They're actually just using them on YouTube. So if you're using YouTube, great, because YouTube will generate captions for you if your video is hosted there. So these are just a few things that you can do to make your podcast a little bit more accessible to people. I would just encourage you to go out and make awesome content that's accessible for everybody. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me at podcastanswers.com/contact. And if you want to start your show and need help doing this, if you've got any value out of this show, I would encourage you to give that value back. You can do that by going to podcastanswers.com/buymeacoffee, and you can just show me your appreciation and help me out a little bit there. So with that, guys, have a great week and keep podcasting.